Hello everyone, and I'm here to guide you into a peaceful slumber. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is as you unwind. So, settle in, get cozy, and let the relaxation begin. My name is Alton Merton, and this happened during a job that was unlike any other. For most of my life, I worked for a secret cryptid hunting unit within the US government. It's a job that sounds ridiculous until you're the one standing toe-to-toe with things that shouldn't exist. I always figured the job would end one of two ways. I'd retire quietly, or I'd vanish into the wilderness, becoming one of the many missing persons our unit tracks. I never thought I'd live to tell this story. The call came in on a Tuesday. I remember because I just settled into my apartment after wrapping up a case in northern Michigan. Something about livestock mutilations that turned out to be coyotes with unusual hunting patterns. Nothing supernatural, just nature being brutal in new ways. I was 3 sips into my first decent bourbon in weeks when my secure phone buzzed. "Merton," I answered, already reaching for my go-bag. "We need you in Oregon. Yesterday." It was Director Holloway, her voice tight with the particular strain that meant civilians were already dead. 12 hours later, I was stepping off a military transport at a small airfield near the Cascade Range. The late September air carried the first bite of autumn, and fog clung to the forest like a shroud. We were dispatched to the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, a place where the trees rise like giants and the fog rolls in thick, swallowing the world whole. The mission was straightforward on paper. Reports of missing hikers had spiked in the region, more than usual, and some of the recovered remains bore signs of violent death, signs that didn't match any known predator. My team consisted of me, our tracker Sam Powell, a stoic guy with a knack for finding anyone, anywhere; Jane Harper, our weapon specialist who could hit a target at 100 yards without blinking; and our tech wizard, Max Lang, who handled everything from satellite phones to drones. We were a tight-knit group, each of us having saved the other's skin more than once. Sam met me at the airfield, his weathered face grim beneath his salt and pepper beard. 6 missing in the last month, he said, handing me a folder as we walked to the waiting jeep. 2 bodies recovered, the rest. He trailed off, letting the implication hang. Jane and Max were already at the ranger station, converting a back room into our operations center. Jane was methodically cleaning her rifle, her movements precise and mechanical. Max hunched over 3 laptops, satellite imagery flickering across the screens. "The latest victim is Emily Dawson," Max said without looking up. 32, experienced hiker, local guide. Went out for a day hike 4 days ago and never came back. I studied the map they'd pinned to the wall, red pins marking the last known locations of the missing blue ones where bodies had been found. No discernible pattern, except they all disappeared within a roughly 20-square-mile area. "Any connections between the victims?" I asked. Jane shook her head. "Different ages, backgrounds, experience levels. Only thing they have in common is they all went missing in the same general area." "What about the bodies?" I asked, dreading the answer. "That's where it gets interesting," Max said, pulling up photos I wish I could unsee. "Medical examiner found puncture wounds that don't match any known predator. Spacing's all wrong for bear, cougar, or wolf. And there's this." He zoomed in on what looked like strange markings around the wounds, almost like the tissue was dissolved. We spent the rest of the day prepping gear and studying topographical maps. As darkness fell, I stepped outside the station, watching as the mist thickened into impenetrable fog. The forest seemed to breathe in the darkness, ancient and patient. Something was out there, hiding in that primeval wilderness, something that had developed a taste for human flesh. And tomorrow, We were going hunting. We set up base camp near the last known location of Emily Dawson. She had been an experienced trekker, familiar with the dangers of the wilderness. Her disappearance had raised more than a few eyebrows. As I zipped my tent closed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that whatever lurked in these woods was already aware of our presence. I checked my sidearm before lying down, finding cold comfort in its weight. Sleep came in fitful bursts, punctuated by dreams of moving shadows and distant inhuman cries echoing through endless trees. We started our search at dawn. The forest, still shrouded in mist, our breath visible in the crisp morning air. Sam took point, his eyes scanning the ground for any sign of passage. Jane flanked our right, rifle at the ready, while Max monitored our location and deployed small reconnaissance drones to scout ahead. The forest felt wrong somehow. Too quiet. Too still. The towering Douglas firs and ancient cedars created a cathedral-like space, their branches interlacing high above to block out most of the sunlight. What little made it through created dappled patterns on the forest floor, shifting like liquid as the wind stirred the canopy. Park ranger said Emily was headed to Blackwater Ridge, Sam said, consulting his GPS. It's about 4 miles northeast of here. Popular spot for photographers because of the view. We moved in silence, each of us scanning our surroundings. My skin prickled with the sensation of being observed, though whenever I turned to look, there was nothing but trees and undergrowth. Hours passed with nothing to show for our efforts. No tracks. No broken branches, nothing to indicate where Emily might have gone. The landscape became increasingly rugged, forcing us to navigate steep ravines and dense thickets of thorny brush. Something's off, Jane muttered as we paused to check our bearings. We should have seen some wildlife by now. Squirrels, birds, something. She was right. The forest was unnaturally silent, as if the local fauna had fled or gone into hiding. It wasn't until the afternoon that we found something. A scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush, stained with blood. Sam examined it closely, his face grim. "This is recent," he said, "less than a day old." Max bagged the sample while Jane documented our location. I scanned the surrounding area, looking for any other signs of disturbance. "There," I said, pointing to a faint depression in the loamy soil. "Looks like something was dragged." Sam crouched, studying the ground with practiced eyes. "Good catch. Direction is..." He pointed deeper into the forest, away from the established trails. "That way." We pressed on, the mood somber. The forest grew denser, the undergrowth thicker, making progress slow and arduous. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the rustle of leaves. The temperature dropped noticeably as we descended into a narrow valley. The soil grew damp beneath our boots, and the vegetation changed from sunlight-loving ferns to mushrooms and moss that thrived in darkness. It was around then that I noticed something odd. The usual sounds of the forest, chirping birds, chattering squirrels, had ceased entirely. An unnatural quiet had settled in, as if the very air was holding its breath. "Something's not right," Jane muttered, her eyes scanning the trees, rifle raised slightly. We moved cautiously, weapons at the ready. The tension was palpable, every step measured, every sense straining for the slightest hint of danger. The trail of disturbed earth and occasional blood smears led us deeper into the valley, to a place where the trees grew so close together that we had to move single file. The ground sloped sharply downward and the air grew colder still, carrying the mineral smell of underground water and wet stone. That's when we stumbled upon the cave. It was hidden behind a thick curtain of vines, its entrance yawning like a black hole against the hillside. If not for the trail we were following, we might have walked right past it. "Think this is where our missing hikers ended up?" Max whispered, his voice barely audible. "One way to find out," I replied, unclipping my flashlight. The entrance was roughly 8 feet high and twice as wide, with strange weathering patterns that made the rock look almost like it had been melted rather than eroded. The ground in front showed signs of frequent passage. Not human footprints, but something else. Something that dragged itself along the ground. Max deployed a small drone, sending it inside to scout the area. We huddled around his tablet, watching the grainy night vision feed as the drone penetrated the darkness. The feed showed a narrow tunnel leading into a larger chamber, the walls marked with strange, almost ritualistic carvings. They didn't match any cultural pattern I recognized. Not Native American, not European, not anything human. "I need to get a closer look at those markings," I said, checking my sidearm. "This place gives me the creeps," Max muttered. "Stay sharp," I told them. "We go in, we document, we get out. No heroics." "I'll go first," I said, taking point. The cave was cold and damp, the air heavy with the scent of decay. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing more of the eerie carvings. They depicted creatures that were neither human nor animal, grotesque amalgamations that defied logic. Some showed scenes of hunting, others of feeding. All featured the same elongated skeletal figures pursuing prey. The narrow entrance tunnel widened after about 50 feet, opening into the chamber we'd seen on the drone feed. The ceiling rose to at least 20 feet, creating an echoing space large enough to hold dozens of people. We reached the chamber, and the stench hit us like a physical force, the unmistakable odor of decomposing flesh, so strong it made my eyes water. As our light swept the space, the source became clear. Bodies, or what was left of them, were scattered around. Some were recent, others in varying stages of decomposition. It was a gruesome sight, enough to churn even the strongest stomach. "Dear God," Jane whispered, covering her nose and mouth. I counted at least 8 distinct corpses, some partially consumed, others seemingly preserved for later consumption. Among the newer remains, I spotted hiking gear that matched the description of Emily Dawson's equipment. Max began documenting the scene, his camera flashing as he took photographs for evidence. Sam moved carefully around the perimeter, examining the ground and walls. "These markings," he said, tracing a weathered hand over one of the carvings. "They're old, very old." As we inspected the remains, noting details for our report, a sound echoed through the cave, a scraping noise like claws on stone, coming from deeper within the mountain. We turned as one, flashlight sweeping the chamber. At the far end, previously hidden in shadow, a narrow passage led further into the earth, and from that passage, a figure emerged. It was tall, emaciated, with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed faintly in the light. Its skin was a mottled gray, and its mouth was filled with jagged teeth, too many to fit in what approximated a human jaw. The creature moved with a jerking, insect-like motion that sent primal fear coursing through my veins. We fired without hesitation, bullets tearing through the air. The muzzle flashes were blinding in the darkness, the reports deafening in the confined space. The creature moved with unnatural speed, dodging most of our shots. It let out a shriek that reverberated through the cave, making my ears ring. A sound like metal scraping against metal, amplified to painful levels. "Center mass," I shouted, adjusting my aim. Jane managed to land a hit, and the creature stumbled, black ichor spraying from its shoulder. But it didn't fall. Instead, it seemed enraged, its movements becoming more frenzied and unpredictable. "Fall back," I shouted, retreating towards the tunnel. "Sam, Max, go." They didn't need to be told twice. Sam and Max were ahead, Jane close behind. I brought up the rear, firing controlled bursts to keep the creature at bay. My rounds found their mark, punching through the thing's torso, but it kept coming, seemingly impervious to wounds that would have dropped any natural predator. As we reached the tunnel entrance, the creature lunged, crossing the distance between us with impossible speed. Its claws raked across Jane's back, tearing through her tactical vest like it was tissue paper. She cried out, collapsing to the ground. "Jane!" Max yelled, turning to help her. But the creature was on her in an instant, its elongated fingers wrapping around her throat, lifting her off the ground. I emptied my magazine into it, each impact causing it to twitch but not deterring it. "Get out!" Jane managed to gasp, her hands scrabbling at the thing's grip. She reached for something on her belt. A grenade. I grabbed Max, pulling him back as the creature tore into Jane. "She's giving us a chance," I hissed. "We have to go now." We retreated down the tunnel, the sounds of struggle fading behind us. Then came a muffled thump that shook dust from the ceiling. Jane had pulled the pin. We burst from the cave, gasping for air. The daylight was blinding after the darkness of the tunnel. Sam was already calling for extraction, his voice steady despite the chaos. We didn't stop moving until we reached the relative safety of our camp, putting distance between us and whatever might emerge from that cave. "Did you see that thing?" Max wheezed, hands on his knees as he fought to catch his breath. "What the hell was it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Nothing in our database matches that morphology." "Jane," Sam's voice broke. She knew what she was doing. We fell silent, each processing the horror we'd witnessed and the loss of our teammate. The extraction team arrived within the hour, but it was too late for Jane. Her sacrifice had bought us time to escape, but the weight of her death pressed down on us like a physical force. Back at the ranger station, we debriefed with Director Holloway via secure video link. Her face remained impassive as we described the creature and the cave of horrors it had made its lair. "The markings suggest it's been there a long time," I explained. "Generations, maybe centuries. Local legends mention shadow stealers that take people who venture too deep into the forest." "And you're certain the explosive eliminated the threat?" Holloway asked. "No," I said honestly. "The tunnel partially collapsed, but we can't confirm the creature was neutralized. If it survived, it's trapped for now, but caves like that often have multiple exits." Holloway's expression hardened. "I'm sending in a containment team. They'll seal the cave system and monitor for any activity." "What about Jane?" Max asked. "Official report will list her as killed by a bear attack during a wildlife survey," Holloway replied. "Her family will receive full benefits and commendations for service to her country." The loss weighed heavily on us all, a stark reminder of the dangers we faced. The creature, whatever it was, remained an unsolved mystery lurking in the wilderness. I couldn't shake the image of its glowing eyes, the way it moved with such unnatural precision, the fact that our bullets seemed to merely inconvenience it. In the aftermath, we reported back to our superiors, detailing the events as best we could. The official story was that Jane had died in a bear attack, a convenient lie to cover the truth. I didn't like it, but it wasn't my call to make. We were given some time off, a chance to recover and regroup. I spent those days in quiet reflection, haunted by the memories of that cave and the creature that dwelled within. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting for its next victim. The world is full of dark, hidden corners, places where the light of civilization doesn't reach. We're the ones sent to explore those places, to confront the monsters that lurk in the shadows. In the end, we're just human, facing things we were never meant to understand. But we do it because someone has to. We do it because the alternative is to let the darkness win. And as long as I'm still breathing, I'll keep fighting, no matter the cost. That's the job. That's the reality of hunting monsters. 3 weeks after the incident, I sat in a sterile conference room at headquarters, a cup of cold coffee forgotten in front of me. Director Holloway had called us in for what she termed a follow-up briefing, but I suspected there was more to it. Sam and Max looked as haggard as I felt. None of us had been sleeping well. The dreams were always the same, running through endless tunnels while something scuttled behind us, gaining with every step. The containment team completed their work. Holloway began without preamble, sliding folders across the table. The cave has been sealed with reinforced concrete and the area declared off-limits due to geological instability. I opened the folder to find photos of the operation, heavy machinery, hazmat suits, armed guards maintaining a perimeter. The final image showed the cave entrance completely blocked, steel rebar protruding from the concrete like skeletal fingers. "Did they find anything?" I asked. "Any sign of—" "Jane's remains were recovered," Holloway interrupted, her voice softening slightly. "As for the entity, there was no trace. Either it was destroyed in the explosion or it escaped," Sam finished, his face grim. Holloway nodded. "We've stepped up surveillance in the area. Motion sensors, thermal imaging, regular patrols. If it's still out there, we'll find it." "What about the markings?" Max asked. "Did the team document them before sealing the cave?" Holloway pushed another folder toward us. "Our linguists and anthropologists have been analyzing the symbols. They don't match any known human language or pictographic system." The photos showed the strange carvings in detail, angular glyphs and disturbing figures that seemed to shift and move even in the static images. Looking at them for too long made my head ache. "Their preliminary assessment is that these markings predate human settlement in the region," Holloway continued. "Carbon dating of organic material embedded in the deeper carvings suggests they're at least 15,000 years old." "So, whatever that thing was, it's been there a long time," I murmured. "The question is whether it's unique or if there are more of them," Sam added. The thought had been haunting me as well. If one such creature could exist, hidden from human discovery for millennia, how many others might be out there? "We're cross-referencing similar disappearances nationwide," Holloway said as if reading my thoughts. "Looking for patterns that might indicate other entities with similar hunting behaviors." "And Emily Dawson?" I asked. "Her family deserves closure." "Official report lists her as presumed dead, body unrecoverable due to predator activity," Holloway replied. "Her parents were told a mountain lion was responsible." More lies. More cover-ups. Sometimes I wondered if we were doing the right thing, hiding the truth from the public. But then I remembered the panic that would ensue if people knew what really lurked in the dark corners of the world. As for Emily Dawson, her fate remained a mystery. Her body wasn't among those in the cave, leaving a small, bitter hope that she might still be out there, alive. We added her to the list of missing persons, another name in a file that seemed to grow longer every day. The unit moved on to the next case, always one step behind the things that go bump in the night. We never talked about Jane after that, not directly, but her memory lingered, a silent reminder of the price we pay for standing between the world and the darkness. 2 months later, I was back in the field, investigating cattle mutilations in Oklahoma that turned out to be the work of a cult rather than anything supernatural. The work continued, an endless cycle of reports, investigations, and containment. But my thoughts often returned to that cave in Oregon, to the creature with too many teeth and eyes that glowed in the dark. I checked the surveillance reports weekly, looking for any sign that it had returned. The winter passed, then spring. The forests of the Pacific Northwest bloomed with new life, covering the scars of our encounter. Hikers returned to the trails, unaware of the danger that had once stalked those woods. I began to hope that perhaps we had succeeded after all, that Jane's sacrifice had not been in vain, that the creature had been trapped or killed in the explosion, its ancient hunger finally extinguished. Then came the call that shattered that fragile hope. 3 hikers missing near Mount Jefferson, Director Holloway said, her voice tight. 2 bodies recovered. The injuries matched the pattern. My blood ran cold. Mount Jefferson was over 100 miles from our original encounter. "It's moved," I said, already reaching for my go-bag. "Or there's more than one." "Team is assembling at the Portland field office," Holloway replied. "Wheels up in 3 hours." I've seen things that defy explanation, faced horrors that would break most men. But it's not the monsters that haunt me. It's the people left behind, the missing and the dead. Their stories unfinished. In the quiet moments when the world is still and the night is dark, I hear their whispers. And I know that as long as there are monsters, there will be hunters like me ready to face them. That's the job. That's the reality. And it's a reality I've come to accept. The helicopter set down in a clearing not far from the base of Mount Jefferson. The mountain loomed above us, its peak shrouded in clouds, indifferent to the horror unfolding in its shadow. Sam and Max flanked me as we disembarked, each carrying more firepower than we had in Oregon. We weren't taking any chances this time. A local ranger met us, his face drawn with stress and lack of sleep. 3 days ago, a group of 5 hikers went up the East Trail, he explained as we loaded our gear into a waiting jeep. Only 2 made it back. They were hysterical, talking about something coming out of the trees, something that moved wrong. And the bodies? I asked. Found yesterday, about 4 miles up the trail. It's not pretty. The ranger wasn't exaggerating. The scene was eerily similar to what we'd found in the cave months earlier. Bodies partially consumed, strange puncture wounds, tissues around the wounds showing signs of chemical decomposition. As if the creature's saliva contained some sort of digestive enzyme that liquefied flesh. Same MO, Sam confirmed, crouching beside one of the bodies. But this is fresh. Less than 24 hours. It's hunting, Max said quietly, and getting bolder. We established a base camp and began our search, methodically covering the area where the attacks had occurred. The forest here was different from the dense coastal woods of our previous encounter, more open with less undergrowth, offering fewer places for something large to hide. Yet the sense of being watched was even stronger. A constant prickling at the back of my neck that made me twitch at every snapping twig or rustling leaf. Night fell, and we continued our search by spotlight and thermal imaging. Max had developed a new drone with enhanced infrared capabilities, designed specifically to detect the unusual heat signature we'd recorded from the creature. I've got something, he said around midnight, hunched over his tablet, 300 yards northwest, moving parallel to the ridgeline. We moved in formation, weapons ready, communication limited to hand signals. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light through the trees and creating pools of deep shadow that seemed to shift and move. The drone's feed showed the heat signature growing stronger, more defined. Whatever we were tracking was large, at least 7 feet tall and moving with the same jerky, insect-like motion I remembered all too well. Visual contact, Sam whispered, pointing ahead. There it was, moving between the trees, the same elongated limbs, the same mottled gray skin. It was dragging something behind it, a dark mass that left a wet trail on the forest floor. On my mark, I breathed, raising my rifle. 3, 2... The creature stopped suddenly, its head swiveling in our direction. Those glowing eyes seemed to look directly at me, through me, into some part of myself I didn't know existed. And then it was moving. Not away from us as expected, but directly toward us, covering ground with impossible speed. Fire! I shouted, and our weapons erupted in unison. This time we were better prepared. Incendiary rounds punched through the creature's torso, igniting on impact. It shrieked, that same metal-on-metal sound that haunted my dreams, and thrashed wildly as flames spread across its body. But still it came, burning and wounded, driven by hunger or rage or some alien emotion we couldn't comprehend. It crashed into our line, sending Sam flying with a sweep of its arm. Max emptied his magazine into it point blank, the muzzle flash illuminating its grotesque face in stark relief. I circled behind it, drawing my sidearm loaded with special hollow points filled with white phosphorus. I emptied the clip into the back of its head, each impact causing a small explosion of searing white light. The creature collapsed, its limbs twitching and spasming. Black ichor pooled beneath it, hissing and steaming where it touched the ground. Is it dead? Max asked, reloading with shaking hands. Not taking any chances, I replied, removing a thermite grenade from my pack. Back up. The grenade detonated in a blinding flash, engulfing the creature in flames hot enough to melt steel. We watched in grim silence as it burned, the stench of it acrid and alien. When the flames finally died down, nothing remained but a blackened smear on the forest floor and a few fragments of bone-like material that refused to burn. Bag those, I told Max, pointing to the fragments. Full containment protocol. We recovered the item it had been dragging, the partial remains of one of the missing hikers. The poor soul hadn't stood a chance against such a predator. As dawn broke, we swept the area one final time before calling in the cleanup team. The official story would be a forest fire caused by illegal campers, explaining the scorched earth and any lingering evidence of our confrontation. You think that's the end of it? Sam asked as we watched the containment team work, his arm in a sling from his encounter with the creature. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe it was the same one from Oregon. Maybe it was another of its kind. Either way, there could be more out there. If there are, we'll find them, Max said with uncharacteristic fierceness. For Jane. I nodded, surveying the mountain wilderness stretching to the horizon. So much territory, so many places for things to hide. And beyond these forests, there were deserts and swamps, mountains and plains, oceans and caves, countless environments where the unknown could lurk, watching and waiting. Back at headquarters, the fragments we recovered were sent to a specialized lab for analysis. Preliminary results confirmed what I had suspected. The material matched nothing in our databases. Its molecular structure unlike any known terrestrial organism. The question remains, Director Holloway said during our debriefing, are these isolated incidents or are we seeing the beginning of a pattern? If they're coming out of hiding, there must be a reason, I pointed out. Environmental changes, human encroachment on their territory, something triggering more aggressive behavior. Or maybe they've always been hunting us, Sam suggested quietly. And we're just getting better at noticing. The thought chilled me. How many missing persons over the centuries, over the millennia, might have fallen prey to these creatures? How many unexplained disappearances might have been attributed to accidents or exposure when something far more sinister was responsible? In the weeks that followed, we compiled reports of similar attacks and disappearances, creating a map of potential hotspots across the country. Patterns emerged, clusters of incidents around certain mountain ranges, deep forests, remote coastlines. Places where the boundaries between our world and whatever lay beyond seemed thinnest. We became more proactive, deploying teams to investigate areas before people went missing, setting up monitoring systems, working with local authorities to restrict access to high-risk locations without revealing the true nature of the threat. It wasn't a perfect system. People still disappeared. Bodies were still found bearing those distinctive wounds. But we were learning, adapting, becoming more effective hunters of the hunters. As for me, I continued to lead field operations, each mission adding to our knowledge, each encounter honing our tactics. The nightmares became less frequent, replaced by a cold determination to protect those who would never know the dangers that lurked in the shadows. I've spent my life in pursuit of things that shouldn't exist, standing at the border between the known world and the mysteries beyond. It's a lonely existence, marked by secrets and loss, by questions that may never be answered. But when I think of the alternative, of these creatures roaming unchecked, of families never knowing what happened to their loved ones, I know the cost is worth paying. So I keep my go bag packed, my weapons loaded, my mind open to possibilities that most would dismiss as impossible. I watch the shadows, listening for sounds that don't belong, always ready for the call that will send me back into the darkness. Because that's who I am. That's what I do. I'm Alton Merton, and I hunt the things that hunt us. wind howls differently here in Denali. It's not just the sound, it's how it moves, how it searches, how it knows. 23 years I've been listening to it, and I still can't predict what it'll whisper next. My name is Ahanu Kingbird. In the language of my Abenaki ancestors, Ahanu means he laughs. There hasn't been much laughter these past few years. The ranger cabin sits on a ridge overlooking the valley, about 18 miles from the nearest road. It's government issue. Weathered, cedar siding, metal roof that sings in the rain, wood stove that can't quite chase away the chill on January nights when the temperature plummets to 30 below. The Park Service calls it Outpost 17, but I've come to call it home. Not much to look at. One room with a cot, desk, radio equipment and shelves lined with field guides, survival manuals and dog-eared paperbacks. I didn't choose this life. It chose me. After my wife Mira died and the medical bills left me drowning in debt, I had to sell our house in Anchorage. With a degree in wildlife biology and experience as a hunting guide, the ranger position was the only thing that made sense. The isolation was a bonus. I didn't want to be around people. People asked how you were doing and expected real answers. Need a backcountry ranger willing to work year-round at Outpost 17, the job listing had stated. Extended isolation, challenging conditions, wildlife management experience required. What it didn't mention was the silence, the kind that becomes a physical presence that follows you and watches you and sometimes speaks to you when you've been alone too long. I remember my supervisor's face when I accepted the position. Most folks don't last more than a season out there, Kingbird, she'd said, not unkindly. Something about that particular area just gets to them. I didn't ask what she meant. Maybe I should have. My duties are straightforward enough. Monitor wildlife activity, assist lost hikers, enforce park regulations, track weather patterns, and report any unusual findings. The unusual findings have been piling up lately. It started 3 months ago. Tracks in the snow that didn't match any known animal. Not wolf, not bear. Something bipedal, but with a stride too long, prints too narrow. I photographed them, measured them, cast them in plaster. Sent the data back to headquarters. Likely degraded bear tracks modified by melt conditions, came the response. But I knew better. Bears don't walk 8 miles in a perfectly straight line. Bears don't circle a cabin 3 times without approaching. Bears don't stand outside your window for hours, just watching, just waiting. The locals, the few I've befriended in the native villages outside the park boundaries, they have a word for what's out there. But they won't say it to me directly. They just warn me not to look for too long if I see something unusual in the twilight hours. They tell me to burn sage and sweetgrass at my doorstep. They give me charms made of bone and sinew that I'm not supposed to examine too closely. The radio crackles to life beside me, a static-laced message about a missing hiker. 23-year-old male, last seen near Sanctuary River. 3rd disappearance this month. I key the mic and acknowledge the message. I'll begin searching at first light. Outside, the wind changes direction. It moves around the cabin like fingers searching for a way in. Like something's testing the walls. I load my rifle and check the locks. Night is falling, and in this wilderness, darkness brings visitors. The search for the missing hiker began at dawn. His name was Eric Nolan, a geology student from Montana State who'd come to collect rock samples. According to his hiking plan, he should have camped near the river bend, about 6 miles from my cabin. The morning fog hung low in the valley as I made my way through dense spruce forest. This early in spring, patches of snow still clung to the north-facing slopes, and the ground was a mess of mud and half-frozen puddles. Perfect for tracking. I found his campsite just after 9 a.m. The tent was still standing, zipped closed from the inside. His backpack was there, his sample bags neatly labeled, his field journal open to the previous day's entry. The final words. Something keeps circling the camp. Too big for a wolf. Moving too quietly for a bear. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no torn fabric. Just an empty sleeping bag with a perfect round hole burned through the center. Not cut. Burned. The edges were black and curled like paper held too close to a flame. As I secured the scene and photographed everything, I noticed the strange silence. No birds, no insects, just the wind and the distant gurgle of the river. Even in early spring, the taiga is never this quiet. I radioed in my findings. Possible wildlife encounter. Maybe a bear. I'm tracking in a northwest direction where I've found what might be drag marks. I lied. What I was following weren't drag marks. They were footprints, the same long, narrow impressions I'd been finding around my cabin. Only these were fresher, clearer. Almost human-like, but the stride length was impossible, nearly 6 feet between steps. Whatever made them was running on 2 legs at a speed no human could match. The tracks led me deeper into a part of the park I rarely patrolled. The trees grew more twisted here, their branches reaching out like arthritic fingers. The light seemed different too, dimmer, though the sky above was clear. After 3 hours of tracking, I found Eric's camera hanging from a tree branch 7 feet off the ground. It swung gently, though there was no breeze. I took it down carefully, preserving any prints, and checked the memory card. Most of the photos were what you'd expect. Rock formations, landscapes, a few selfies at scenic viewpoints. The final image, taken at 2:17 a.m. according to the timestamp, showed nothing but darkness. I almost scrolled past it when I noticed something in the corner, the reflection of eyes in the camera flash. Not the typical eye shine of a nocturnal animal. These eyes were too forward-facing, too aware, too human. But no human has eyes that reflect yellow-green in the dark. The radio on my belt squawked, making me jump. It was dispatch asking for an update. As I responded, I heard a sound in the distance, a high, undulating wail that started like a woman's scream and ended like a coyote's howl. "What was that?" asked the dispatcher. "Wind in the canyon," I lied again. The sound came once more, closer now. "I'm heading back to base," I said. "Lights failing. I'll resume the search tomorrow." I knew I wouldn't find Eric Nolan. Not alive anyway. The Abenaki have stories about forest spirits that can mimic human voices, that can take on almost human forms. My grandmother called them the shadow walkers, beings that exist in the space between our world and the next. They hunger for more than flesh, she'd told me. They hunger for your essence, your memories, your name. As I hurried back through the darkening forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, followed, assessed. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift independently of the branches above. Twice I spotted movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned, there was nothing there. The wailing call came a 3rd time as I reached the edge of the forest near my cabin. This time it formed words. Ahanu, it seemed to say. Ahanu. No one in Alaska called me by my first name. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window with my rifle across my lap, watching the tree line. The moon cast long shadows across the clearing, shadows that sometimes moved against the wind. Twice I saw it, a tall, impossibly thin silhouette at the forest edge. Standing perfectly still, watching. By morning my eyes were raw and my nerves frayed. The radio brought news that a search and rescue team would arrive by helicopter to look for Eric, but bad weather was moving in. They'd be delayed at least 24 hours. I spent the day reviewing my notes on the previous disappearances. Thomas Elliott, 45, experienced backcountry guide, vanished from his campsite 2 months ago. All his gear left behind, including his boots. Maria Kellner, 36, wildlife photographer, disappeared 3 weeks later. Her camera was found half buried in mud, containing dozens of photos of the same empty clearing, as if she'd stood in one spot, pressing the shutter over and over. Now Eric. Young, smart, prepared. Gone without a trace. I pulled out my personal journal, not the official ranger log that gets submitted to headquarters, but my private record of the stranger occurrences. The unexplainable tracks, the objects moving around my cabin when I'm away, the voices in the wind calling my name, the dreams where I'm walking through the forest following someone who's always just ahead, just out of sight, someone wearing my dead wife's blue wool hat. Around noon, the storm hit, a late spring blizzard that blanketed the mountains in white fury. The radio sputtered with static. The search team wouldn't make it today, maybe not tomorrow either. I was on my own. When the power went out, I wasn't surprised. I lit the kerosene lamps and built up the fire in the wood stove. The blizzard raged outside, wind screaming around the cabin's corners. Sometimes it sounded like words. I opened my laptop to review Eric's photos again. The battery was low, but I had enough power for a quick look. I enlarged the final image, the one with the eye shine in the corner. Using basic photo editing software, I enhanced the contrast and brightness. What I saw froze my blood. Beyond the glowing eyes was the faint outline of a face, gaunt, angular with skin stretched too tight over two sharp bones. The mouth was open in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that were long and needle-thin. But it was the eyes that held me. Deep-set, intelligent, hungry, they knew they were being photographed. They wanted to be seen. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart hammering. Outside, the wind suddenly died. The blizzard stopped with unnatural abruptness, leaving absolute silence in its wake. Then came 3 distinct knocks on my cabin door. Nobody could have approached the cabin in that blizzard. Nobody should be out there. The knocks came again. Tap, tap, tap. "Ranger service," a voice called. It was thin and reedy, with an accent I couldn't place. "Man lost in storm. Need help." Every instinct screamed danger. I reached for my rifle. "One moment," I called, moving silently to the window beside the door. I peered through the frost-edged glass. A figure stood on my porch, tall, wrapped in what looked like tattered dark clothing. Its face was hidden by the hood of its coat and the shadows of my porch. "Please," it said. "Cold, dying." Its voice had changed slightly, becoming more fluid, more persuasive, like it was learning how to speak better with each word. "What's your name?" I asked through the door. A long pause. "Eric," it said finally. "Eric Nolan." My blood turned to ice water. My grip tightened on the rifle. "Where are you from, Eric?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Another pause, longer this time. "Montana," it said, but the word was wrong, stretched out, as if it was tasting the syllables. "Montana." It took a step closer to the door. In the lamplight spilling through the window, I could see its hands now. Long-fingered, spindly, with joints that bent in too many places. "Let me in, Ahanu," it said. "We can talk about Mira." My dead wife's name in this thing's mouth. I raised the rifle. "Step away from the door," I ordered. It tilted its head at an impossible angle, nearly 90 degrees. The hood fell back slightly. I fired a warning shot into the ceiling. When I looked back at the window, it was gone. I moved quickly from window to window, scanning the darkness outside. Nothing moved in the fresh snow. No footprints led away from my porch. But carved into the wooden door, as if by long, sharp fingernails, was a single word: soon. The storm passed sometime in the night, leaving behind 3 feet of fresh snow and an unnatural stillness. Dawn broke with crystal clarity, the kind of sharp, blue-white light that only comes after a blizzard. The radio remained dead. The storm must have damaged the repeater station on the mountain. I was cut off, isolated. I spent the morning securing the cabin. I laid down lines of rock salt across every threshold, hung iron nails over the windows, and drew protective symbols on the doors. Things my grandmother had taught me. Things I'd always considered superstition until now. The rational part of my brain argued this was pointless, that I was exhausted and paranoid. The deeper, more primitive part knew better. As I worked, I pieced together what I knew or thought I knew about what was happening. The missing hikers, the strange tracks, the being that visited my cabin last night. The native elders in the village had warned me when I first took this post. The old ones still walk in those mountains, they'd said. The ones who hunger, the ones who wear many skins. Skinwalker, the word I'd been avoiding even in my thoughts. According to Navajo legend, skinwalkers were once medicine men who gained supernatural powers through forbidden rituals, including the ability to transform into animals or even to steal the appearance of specific humans. But this was Denali, Alaska, thousands of miles from Navajo lands. Whatever was stalking these forests might go by a different name among the Athabascan or Tlingit peoples, but the essence seemed chillingly similar. Something that could almost pass for human, something that hunted humans, something that could potentially become its victims in some terrible way. Around midday, I spotted movement at the tree line, a flash of blue that stood out against the snow and dark pines. I grabbed my binoculars. There, half hidden among the trees, was a figure wearing a blue wool hat. Mira's hat. My heart lurched. Rational thought warred with desperate hope. It couldn't be her. Mira had been dead for 3 years, her body buried in Anchorage. But the rational mind holds little power against the heart's deepest wishes. The figure stepped partially out from behind a tree, just enough for me to see it was a woman with long, dark hair. Just like Mira's, she raised her hand, beckoning me to come. Not real, I whispered to myself. Not her. She beckoned again, more urgently. I grabbed my rifle, emergency pack, and heavy coat. If this was a trap, I was walking into it with eyes open. If by some impossible chance it was really her, I had to know. The temperature had dropped to well below zero, the snow squeaking under my boots as I approached the tree line. The woman had retreated deeper into the forest, always staying just in sight, just far enough ahead that I couldn't make out her face clearly. Mira's distinctive blue hat was clearly visible, though, like a beacon drawing me forward. I followed for nearly a mile, the cabin disappearing behind me. The forest grew denser, older, the spruce trees twisting unnaturally. I noticed we were following a game trail that didn't appear on any of my maps. The snow here was disturbed by numerous tracks, not all of them animal. The woman stopped in a small clearing and turned partially toward me. I still couldn't see her face clearly, but something was wrong with her movements, jerky, stilted, like a puppet with tangled strings. "Who are you?" I called, raising my rifle. She tilted her head, that same impossible angle I'd seen the night before. When she spoke, the voice was Mira's, but broken, like a damaged recording. "Come home, Mahanu. I've been waiting." "You're not her," I said, my voice catching. "Mira's dead. Am I?" the thing wearing my wife's hat asked. It turned fully toward me. The face was Mira's. Her high cheekbones, her dark eyes, the small scar above her right eyebrow from a childhood fall. But the expression was all wrong. Empty. Hungry. "I've been so cold," it said in Mira's voice. "Let me get warm." Like we used to. It took a step toward me. The movement rippled through its body strangely, as if its joints weren't quite connected properly. I raised my rifle higher. "Stay back." It smiled, and the smile went too wide, stretching beyond the natural corners of its mouth. "Don't you recognize your wife?" it asked, voice shifting midway through the sentence, becoming that thin, reedy tone from the night before. "You're not my wife," I said. "My wife is dead. You're something else, something wearing her memory." It laughed, a sound like dry branches scraping together. "Clever ranger," it said. The others weren't so perceptive. They saw what they wanted to see. Came willingly. What did you do to them? I demanded. To Eric? To the others? It glided closer. I noticed now that its feet didn't quite touch the snow. I took their essence, it said. Their memories, their faces. It grinned again, that terrible too-wide smile. Their names. I fired a warning shot into the tree beside it. The creature didn't flinch. Names have power, Ahanu Kingbird. It continued, circling slowly to my right. When I take your name, I'll walk out of these woods wearing your skin. I'll live in your cabin. I'll file your reports. No one will know the difference. It raised a hand toward me, Mira's hand, but the fingers too long, too jointed, stretching toward me like pale spider legs. But first, it whispered, I need you to invite me in. I ran. Survival training teaches you to stay put when lost, to conserve energy, to make rational decisions. But survival training doesn't account for ancient horrors that wear your dead wife's face. I crashed through the forest, heart hammering, lungs burning in the frigid air. Behind me I heard it moving, not the sound of footsteps, but a slithering, rustling noise like something large dragging itself over frozen leaves. Ah, no, it called, its voice shifting between Mira's familiar tones and something ancient and empty. You can't run from me in my own forest. My own forest. The words chilled me more than the sub-zero air. This thing considered itself the true owner of these woods. Perhaps it had been here long before the national park was established, before white settlers arrived, maybe even before my ancestors crossed the land bridge from Asia. I broke through the trees onto a frozen creek bed and paused, gasping for breath. The landscape was unfamiliar. I'd worked this territory for nearly 2 years, but nothing looked right. The mountains on the horizon were wrong, sharper, closer together than they should be. Panic rose in my throat. Somehow I'd been led into a place that wasn't entirely part of the natural world I knew. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled, raising my rifle. A raven perched on a nearby branch, its head cocked, watching me with 2 intelligent eyes. In Abenaki stories, ravens were messengers, tricksters, sometimes helpers. This one seemed to be waiting for something. Which way? I asked it, feeling slightly insane for talking to a bird. The raven cawed once and took flight, heading upstream. Without better options, I followed. The creek bed led to a narrow canyon I'd never seen before. The rock walls rose on either side, striated with unusual red-black mineral deposits that looked disturbingly like dried blood. The raven waited for me at the canyon entrance, then flew deeper in. I checked my compass. The needle spun wildly, rendering it useless. My GPS watch showed no signal. I was navigating blind in impossible terrain. The canyon narrowed further until I had to turn sideways to squeeze through. Claustrophobia clawed at me, but the raven kept flying ahead, urging me forward. Finally, the passage opened into a small grotto. What I saw there stopped me cold. 3 bodies sat propped against the far wall. Thomas Elliot, Maria Kellner, and Eric Nolan, the missing hikers. But they weren't dead, not exactly. They breathed shallowly, eyes half open but vacant. Their skin had a grey, papery quality, stretched too tight over their bones. They looked emptied. "Hello, Ranger," said Thomas in a monotone voice. His mouth moved, but his eyes remained unfocused. "Have you come to join us?" "We've been waiting," Maria added, her head rolling limply to face me. "It wears us," Eric whispered, "one at a time, when it needs to hunt." I approached cautiously, rifle ready. "What happened to you?" "It took our names," Thomas said. "Our memories, our selves." "But not entirely," Maria continued. "It keeps us alive. It needs living vessels to draw from." "Like batteries," Eric murmured. "We power the disguises." I knelt beside Eric, the most recently taken. His breathing was shallow, his pulse weak but present. I touched his hand. It was cold as the surrounding stone. "How do I kill it?" I asked. All 3 laughed in perfect, terrifying unison, a hollow sound that echoed through the grotto. You don't, they said together. It has existed since before humans walked these lands. It will exist long after. But, Eric added, his voice momentarily stronger, you can trap it, bind it. How? I demanded. Names, Maria whispered. True names bind. Iron burns. Fire cleanses. It's coming, Thomas announced suddenly, his vacant eyes looking past me toward the canyon entrance. It smells your fear, your grief, your loneliness. You're perfect. I turned to see a shadow lengthening across the grotto floor, a distorted, stretched shadow that moved against the light. Run, Eric urged with sudden clarity, or fight, but don't let it touch you. Don't let it speak your name in full. The raven cawed loudly, flying in agitated circles above my head. A warning. I backed away from the 3 empty vessels, raising my rifle once more. The shadow grew, darkening the entire grotto. The temperature plummeted until each breath crystallized before my face. From the canyon entrance came a sound like dry skin stretching across ancient bones. Then it appeared, no longer wearing Mira's form, but its true shape. Or at least the closest my human mind could comprehend its true shape. It was tall, skeletal, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its skin was like old parchment stretched over a frame of too many bones. Its face was almost human, but elongated, with 2 large eyes that reflected yellow-green in the dim light. It moved with a fluid grace that defied its brittle appearance. A Hanu kingbird, it said, its voice now a dry rustling like autumn leaves. Last of your bloodline, keeper of old knowledge you've forgotten. I've been patient, I've been careful, and now you're mine. It extended one long-fingered hand toward me. Where it touched the stone floor, frost patterns spread outward like spider webs. I knew I couldn't outrun it, couldn't hide from it. My only chance was to fight. But how do you fight a nightmare that's walked the earth for millennia? Time moved strangely in that grotto, stretching and compressing like taffy pulled by unseen hands. The Skinwalker circled me, sometimes moving with terrible swiftness, sometimes seeming to freeze between 1 second and the next. Your ancestors knew me, it rasped. They left me offerings, respected me, but your kind has forgotten the old ways, the old bargains. My grandmother didn't forget, I said, keeping the rifle trained on it. She taught me about things like you. The creature tilted its head, joints cracking. Did she teach you how powerless you are? Did she tell you what happens when I take your name? Iron burns, I recited, remembering the emptied hiker's words. Fire cleanses. Names bind. The Skinwalker hissed, a sound like steam escaping a narrow pipe. It stopped circling. Old knowledge, it acknowledged, but incomplete. It grinned, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. You have iron, you have fire, but you don't have my name, Ranger, and without that you can only delay me. It was right. I had iron nails in my pack and matches for fire, but no true name to bind it. My grandmother had said these beings guarded their true names jealously, for names held power over them. Behind me, I heard movement. The 3 emptied. Hikers had risen to their feet, moving with the same jerky, puppet-like motions I'd seen before. The Skinwalker was controlling them. Hold him, it commanded. They lurched toward me. I fired at the ceiling, bringing down stone and debris between us, momentarily blocking their path. The Skinwalker snarled, a sound that made my bones vibrate painfully. The raven swooped low, its wing brushing my ear as it passed. It cawed once, sharply, and I felt something small and hard fall into my coat collar, cold metal against my skin. An iron nail, but not just any nail. This one was old, hand-forged, etched with symbols I recognized from my grandmother's teachings. I had similar ones in my pack, but this was different, ancient, powerful. Understanding flashed through me. The raven wasn't just a bird, it was help. The kind of help my grandmother had told me about in stories I'd dismissed as fantasy. Time for a desperate gamble. "You want my name?" I called to the Skinwalker. "Come and take it. But first, show me your true form, not this approximation my human mind can process. Show me what you really are." Pride. These ancient beings had it in abundance. The Skinwalker hesitated, then seemed to swell, its form shifting, expanding. "You wish to witness my true glory before I consume you?" it asked, voice deepening to a bone-rattling bass. "Very well, Ahanu Kingbird. Few have seen and remained sane. It will make your essence all the sweeter." The air around it shimmered like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. Its form blurred, stretched, became something my eyes couldn't properly focus on, all angles and dimensions that shouldn't exist. For a moment, just a moment, I glimpsed its true nature. And in that glimpse I heard its name, not with my ears but somewhere deep in my mind, a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake, like wind through hollow bones, a name unpronounceable by human tongues. But I didn't need to pronounce it. I just needed to hold it in my mind. As the Skinwalker began to return to its more comprehensible form, I struck. I threw the ancient iron nail directly at its center mass. At the same time, I focused every ounce of my will on that ice-cracking, bone-whistling name I'd glimpsed in its true form. The nail struck home. The Skinwalker's shriek split the air, a sound so terrible I felt warm wetness trickling from my ears. Where the nail pierced it, its skin blackened and smoked. It thrashed, elongated limbs flailing. "Your name is mine," I roared, though I couldn't hear my own voice over the creature's screams. "Return to your slumber. Release what you've taken." The emptied hikers collapsed like marionettes with cut strings. The Skinwalker's form began to contract, folding in on itself like paper burning from the edges inward. "This binding is temporary, Ranger," it hissed, its voice fading. "I will return. I always return." "But not today," I replied. With a final, world-bending shriek, it imploded into a point of absolute darkness that hung in the air for one heartbeat, two, then winked out of existence. Silence fell. The raven landed on my shoulder, its weight reassuringly solid. "Thank you," I whispered to it. The bird cawed softly, then took flight, disappearing up through a crack in the grotto's ceiling I hadn't noticed before. I turned to the hikers. They were stirring, color returning to their skin, awareness to their eyes. They would live, though how much they would remember I couldn't say. Outside the grotto, I found we were less than a mile from my cabin. The impossible geography had righted itself, as if the landscape had been holding its breath and could now relax. As I helped the weakened hikers back to safety, I reflected on what had happened. I hadn't destroyed the Skinwalker. Beings like that couldn't be destroyed, only bound, only forced to slumber for a time. One day it would return, whether in years or decades or centuries, I couldn't know. But I had learned things in that confrontation, about the creature, about myself, about the knowledge my grandmother had tried to pass down that I'd been too modern to fully accept. The search and rescue helicopter arrived the next day. The hikers were evacuated, their miraculous survival attributed to luck and my tracking skills. I filed my report, carefully editing the truth into something the Park Service could understand and file away. I kept the ancient nail, now blackened and twisted. I wear it on a cord around my neck. At night, when the wind circles my cabin and the shadows move strangely in the corners of my vision, I touch that nail and remember the Skinwalker's true name, the name that exists somewhere between sound and silence, between being and nothingness. I remain at Outpost 17. Someone needs to watch the forest. Someone needs to remember the old ways, the old dangers. Someone needs to listen when the wind changes and whispers warnings of ancient hunters waking from their slumber. My name is Ahanu Kingbird. In the language of my ancestors, Ahanu means he laughs. There hasn't been much laughter these past few years, but I'm still here, still watching, still remembering. And so is it. I remember settling into our little two-man tent that evening with a sense of calm expectation. Just me and my husband Joseph, tucked away in a remote corner of the Galloway forest. We'd been planning this trip for months, seeking escape from deadlines and the constant drone of city life. The forest welcomed us with its ancient embrace, tall pines swaying gently overhead as we followed winding trails through the afternoon. "This spot is perfect," Joseph had declared, setting down his backpack in a small clearing surrounded by dense trees. I agreed, breathing in air that tasted clean and verdant, untouched by exhaust fumes and concrete dust. We'd hiked for nearly 6 hours, following a route that took us deeper into the wilderness than we'd ever ventured before. The isolation was deliberate. We wanted stars without light pollution, silence without distant traffic, and the raw experience of being truly alone with nature. By the time we set up camp, my muscles ached pleasantly, my face flushed from exertion and mountain air. Joseph worked methodically, hammering stakes and stretching canvas while I arranged our sleeping bags and gathered kindling for a small fire. The routine felt comfortable, something we'd perfected over years of weekend excursions, though never quite this remote. "No cell service," Joseph noted, checking his phone before tucking it away. "Just us and the trees." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they lodged in my mind, a quiet warning I dismissed as paranoia. Later, I would curse myself for not heeding that first flicker of unease. We cooked a simple meal over the campfire, canned stew heated in a small pot, crusty bread we'd carried wrapped in foil. The forest grew darker around us, shadows deepening between trees, sounds shifting from bird song to the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures stirring awake. "Listen," Joseph whispered as we finished eating. Complete silence, but it wasn't silent, not really. The forest breathed around us, wind through branches, distant water trickling over stones, the subtle symphony of insects and creatures too small to see. I strained my ears, trying to catalog each sound to establish a baseline of normal. Why this seemed important, I couldn't articulate. We retired early, exhausted from the hike. The tent felt secure, a fragile haven of civilization in the wilderness. Joseph fell asleep almost immediately, his breathing deep and rhythmic beside me. I lay awake longer, watching patterns of moonlight dapple the tent fabric, listening to the forest settle into its nighttime melody. Eventually, I drifted off, lulled by Joseph's steady breathing and the gentle whisper of wind through pine needles. I was exhausted in that good, contented way that usually promises solid, dreamless sleep. I had no idea what waited in the darkness. Sometime after midnight, I stirred awake. At first, all I noticed was the thick darkness, broken only by the faint glow of moonlight edging through the fabric of our tent. My eyes darted around, trying to reorient. The familiar weight of our sleeping bag felt suddenly confining, and my bladder signaled urgent discomfort. I realized I needed to step outside for a bathroom break. Nothing unusual there. Just one of those moments when nature calls inconveniently during the night. I was tempted to ignore it, to force myself back to sleep, but the pressure was insistent. I knew I wouldn't be able to drift off again without taking care of business. I turned to check on Joseph, quietly making sure I wouldn't disturb him. He was still asleep, breathing in that slow, calm rhythm I knew so well. His face looked peaceful in the faint moonlight, untroubled by whatever had pulled me from slumber. I'd almost made up my mind to slip out silently when a strange noise cut through the stillness. A slow, methodical scratching, like fingers dragging against the ground. The sound came from just outside our tent, too deliberate to be a forest creature scurrying past. My thoughts raced in seconds. Perhaps it was just some curious animal sniffing around our campsite, drawn by lingering food scents. But this sound was too measured, almost deliberate, a conscious rhythm of scrape, pause, scrape that raised the fine hairs on my arms. I froze, ears straining to interpret the sound. The scratching continued, unhurried and persistent. It wasn't the random rustling of leaves or the skittering of small paws. This was steady, intentional, human. My bladder's urgency suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the growing dread that pooled in my stomach. Someone was outside our tent, inches away from where we slept, digging into the earth with what sounded like bare hands. The rational part of my mind offered explanations. Another camper looking for something they'd dropped. A forest ranger checking the soil, even a researcher collecting samples. But at this hour, in this isolated spot, the excuses withered as the scratching continued, metronomic and disturbing. I glanced at Joseph again, debating whether to wake him. Would he think I was overreacting? The scratching grew slightly louder, more vigorous, as if whoever or whatever was outside had found renewed purpose in their task. With my breath caught in my throat, I paused, listening for any sign it had moved away. When the sound didn't fade, I gathered what little courage remained and inched toward the tent flap. My fingers trembled as they found the cold metal of the zipper. I eased the tent zipper open just a bit, wincing at each small click of metal teeth separating. A slice of moonlight spilled in, illuminating the forest floor. At first, all I could see were shadows of shrubs and the outline of tall trunks, their bark silvered by moonlight. Then I spotted movement a few feet to my left, a shape crouched low against the ground. My eyes adjusted to the darkness and I realized it was a woman. She looked surprisingly young, perhaps in her 20s, with hair tangled and hanging around her face in clumps. She was so close to our tent that I wondered how I hadn't heard her approach. She was digging into the soil with her bare hands, scooping out little clumps of dirt as if unearthing some hidden treasure. There was something profoundly disturbing about her posture. She moved in slow, careful motions, almost like she was in a trance. Her fingers curved like claws, nails caked with earth, scraping deeper into the growing hole beside our tent. I tried to steady myself, but my pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out every other sound. I kept glancing back to Joseph, who was still cluelessly asleep. The moonlight cast bizarre shadows across the woman's face, hollowing her cheeks and darkening her eye sockets until she looked almost skeletal. The idea of confronting a stranger in the middle of nowhere left me frozen with indecision. For a second, I considered zipping the tent closed and pretending I hadn't seen her. But what if she needed help? What if she was injured or lost? Or worse, what if she meant us harm? The question alone made my skin prickle with gooseflesh. So I shuffled backward and nudged Joseph awake. In a hushed whisper, I told him there was someone right outside. His eyes snapped open, instantly alert in a way that told me he recognized the tension in my voice. He followed my gaze to the half-open zipper. Without hesitating, he reached for our flashlight. I stayed low, peeking over his shoulder as he directed a small beam of light toward the figure. She barely reacted, just paused her digging for a moment, as if considering whether the interruption was worth acknowledging. The beam lit up her face. A mixture of dirt and sweat clung to her skin, and her eyes had a distant look, unfocused and glassy, as if she wasn't fully present in that moment. "Hey, are you okay?" Joseph called out, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness of the forest. But she didn't respond. She just slowly stood, letting the loose earth drop from her fingertips. For a heartbeat, I thought she might lash out or speak, but she remained silent, her expression blank yet somehow intense. Then, in one fluid motion, she turned and walked deeper into the darkness, leaving that shallow hole right next to our tent. Joseph and I exchanged a look of disbelief. Part of me wanted to chase her down, find out who she was and what she was doing, but common sense said otherwise. The isolation of the place was suddenly overwhelming. We were miles from the nearest road, farther still from other people who might help if things went wrong. After a few tense minutes of debate, I decided I still needed to step outside. I couldn't exactly hold it till dawn, so I unzipped the tent the rest of the way, scanning the shadows for any trace of the woman. The night air felt colder than it had an hour before, seeping through my jacket and raising goosebumps along my arms. Every tree took on a menacing outline, branches reaching like gnarled fingers. Shadows pooled in unexpected places, creating pockets of absolute darkness where anything might hide. My husband stood guard, flashlight sweeping left and right, while I tended to my business just a few feet from our tent. No sign of the strange woman anywhere, but the unease lingered, a weight pressing against my chest. Once I returned to the tent, we tried to settle down again. We talked in hushed tones, speculating on what we had just witnessed. Was she a lost hiker? A local who wandered away from another campsite? Someone with mental health issues who'd found her way deep into the forest? Neither explanation felt quite right. "I don't like this," Joseph whispered, still clutching the flashlight. She was digging right next to where we're sleeping. What could she possibly be looking for? I wondered aloud, my imagination conjuring images of buried items, weapons, evidence, human remains. Each possibility seemed more disturbing than the last. The hole itself troubled me, not quite a foot deep, roughly circular, dug with obvious purpose. Not random scratching or animal foraging. She had been looking for something specific, or perhaps preparing to place something there. Exhaustion eventually won out over adrenaline, and we lay back down, the zipper firmly closed. I closed my eyes, trying to slow my racing thoughts, hoping the rest of the night would pass quietly. But every time the wind rustled the leaves, I braced for the possibility of seeing her again, crouched just inches away from where we lay. The tent suddenly felt too thin, almost transparent, like no barrier at all between us and whatever lurked in the forest. The nylon walls that had seemed sturdy enough hours ago now felt like tissue paper, offering no real protection. I think I drifted off for a bit, though my dreams were uneasy fragments of pursuit and discovery. My mind kept returning to the sight of her, kneeling in the moonlight, nails scratching into the dirt, and that hollow expression on her face, the kind that hinted at some buried distress or a reality far different from ours. Joseph stayed awake longer, I could tell. He shifted around, hands gripping the flashlight as if waiting for her to come back. That was how the first part of the night played out. Two people in a campsite that had seemed so comforting just hours before. Now wrestling with the notion that safety can vanish with one bizarre encounter. We had no clue what would happen next, or if this stranger would return. All we could do was lie there, ears straining for another hint of movement, waiting for dawn, and hoping she wouldn't appear again. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I recall is being startled awake by a metallic rattle just outside the tent. It took me a second to realize it wasn't part of a dream. No, this was real, a sound of something or someone picking through our gear. My insides twisted at the thought that the stranger from before was back. I turned my head and saw Joseph's eyes snap open too. Neither of us spoke. We just locked gazes, letting the clattering go on for a tense moment before deciding to act. He unzipped the door as quietly as he could, stepping out with the flashlight in hand. I poked my head out right behind him, my pulse pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Sure enough, she was there. The same person, the same filthy clothes and unkempt hair, only now she seemed deeply absorbed in our supplies. Pots and utensils were scattered around her feet. She crouched low, head tilted, as if the items themselves were more fascinating than we were. She hadn't tried to take off with anything, but the way she examined our belongings left me unnerved. There was an eerie curiosity in her expression, almost childlike, but it clashed with the rest of her disheveled appearance. She turned a metal spork over in her hands, studying it with an intensity that seemed wildly disproportionate. Joseph called out to her, not exactly shouting, but loud enough to cut through the hush of the forest. "Hey, that's ours. Do you need help or something?" His voice betrayed the tension he was feeling, a slight tremor undermining his attempt at authority. The flashlight beam fell across her face, revealing eyes that glinted in the harsh light. She lifted her head, letting a small metal cup clatter from her grip. She didn't move or speak, just stared. I tried to read something, anything in her eyes, but came up blank. Was she hostile, confused, lost? My thoughts were all over the place. A heavy knot tightened in my gut as I realized how vulnerable we were. Joseph was still trying to get through to her, asking if she was okay, if she needed food or water or directions. But she offered no explanation, no hint at what she might want. She just held that unnerving stare. It was as if our words weren't registering, or maybe she just didn't care. Before I could even decide what to do, Joseph backed away, retreating to the tent flap. He couldn't force her to leave without risking a full confrontation. Neither of us wanted that. We were out here alone, in the middle of nowhere, with no quick way to call for assistance. If she didn't budge, we were at a disadvantage. I stood there in the open air for a moment, wondering if maybe I could reason with her. But I froze, tongue-tied and overwhelmed by her strange presence. She looked at me, and the flashlight beam caught a smudge of dirt across her cheek that gave her a feral quality. Slowly, she lowered herself back into a crouch, rummaging around our stuff with total disregard for the tension in the air. A million scenarios bounced around my head. Should we pack up and leave? Confront her more forcefully? Try to communicate again? My instinct screamed that a person who acted this way wasn't going to respond to normal logic. So I decided to return to the tent, quietly zipping the door shut behind me and Joseph. The two of us sat there for several minutes, listening to every scrape and shuffle outside. It felt like we were stranded in a surreal standoff with no clear path out. "What do we do?" I whispered, clutching Joseph's arm. "She's not stealing anything. She's just examining everything." "I don't know," he admitted, "but I don't like it. There's something wrong with her." Eventually the rummaging sounds faded. I exhaled, trying to settle the hammering in my chest. Maybe she'd move on. Maybe this would become just another bizarre campfire story. But then the digging returned, the same slow, deliberate scraping near the side of the tent. I realized she was back at that little hole she'd started. The sound felt closer than ever, like she was practically inches from my head. We both jumped when I finally shouted through the tent walls, telling her to stop. The instant the words left my mouth, there was a frantic shuffle. It reminded me of the way a startled animal might tear through the brush. I scrambled to peer outside, but by the time I got the zipper partway open, she was gone. Just darkness, shifting shadows, and the faint rustling of leaves. The hole beside our tent was now nearly a foot deep. Joseph grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, sweeping the beam across the clearing. No sign of her, but something caught his attention in the freshly dug hole. "There's something here," he said, voice tight with tension. I moved beside him, peering down into the dark pit. At first I saw nothing but dirt and small stones. Then the flashlight beam caught something pale, a flash of white against the dark soil. Joseph knelt, hesitated, then reached into the hole. I wanted to stop him, to tell him not to touch whatever was buried there, but curiosity overrode my caution. He pulled out a small object and held it up to the light. It was a tooth, a human molar, roots intact with dirt still clinging to it. "Oh God," I whispered, recoiling. "Is that real?" Joseph turned it over in his palm, his face draining of color. "It looks real and fresh." The implication hung in the air between us. Where had it come from? Who did it belong to? And why was this strange woman digging it up in the middle of the night? We didn't sleep well after that. Every passing minute dragged on while we waited for her to return. Joseph gripped the flashlight, occasionally shining it through the thin fabric of the tent to see if anyone was out there. The forest seemed to close in, thick with tension. I couldn't manage to keep my eyes shut for more than a minute or two before some small rustle made me start all over again. Dawn came at last, bringing a weak sliver of grey light through the canopy. We cautiously unzipped the tent, feeling like intruders on our own campsite. Our gear was scattered over the area: cookware, water bottles, clothing items. She had touched everything, inspected it, then tossed it aside. The only thing more unsettling than that chaos was the hole now dug nearly a foot deep beside our tent. No obvious reason, just a hole, as if that had been her main objective all along. The tooth lay where Joseph had placed it on a flat rock, a mute testimony to something we couldn't comprehend. My husband and I scanned the area, but she was nowhere to be found. No footprints beyond some smudges of dirt, no sign of another tent or bag of her own, just our stuff left in disarray. We collected what we could, still half expecting her to materialize from behind a tree. "We need to report this," Joseph said, stuffing his sleeping bag into its compression sack with jerky movements. "To the rangers or police or someone?" I nodded, though the prospect of explaining what happened made me doubt we'd be taken seriously. A strange woman digging holes and examining camping gear. It sounded absurd in the morning light, despite the evidence scattered around us. "What about the tooth?" I asked, not wanting to touch it but equally reluctant to leave it behind. Joseph considered for a moment, then pulled out a small Ziploc bag we used for food storage. He carefully placed the tooth inside, sealing it shut. "Evidence," he said grimly. As we packed, I noticed something we'd missed in the night. A series of small holes similar to the one by our tent, forming a rough line leading into the trees. Each about the same size, each seemingly dug by hand, spaced about 10 feet apart. "Joseph," I called, pointing. "Look at this." He joined me, following my gaze to the line of excavations. "How many are there?" We followed the trail of holes into the woods, counting as we went. 6, 7, 8. They continued in a straight line, each one freshly dug. At the 9th hole we found another tooth, and a fingernail, in the 10th. Part of me was still braced for her to appear again, maybe running at us or circling the site in that awkward crouch. But the forest remained still, watching us with green indifference as we hurried back to break down our tent. We left that clearing with an odd mixture of guilt and relief. Guilt for not being able to help someone who, for all we knew, needed it desperately. Relief for escaping an encounter that felt steeped in danger, even if it never escalated into outright violence. During the entire hike back, I kept twisting around to see if she was following us. The shadow seemed to move at the corner of my vision, but I never saw her again. By the time we reached the safer, more populated trails, I realized I had been holding my breath in tense bursts. We reported the incident at the ranger station, showing them the tooth and describing the woman and the line of holes. They took our statement with professional concern, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They promised to investigate, to send someone to check the area. I wonder if they ever did. The tooth, they told us, would be turned over to the proper authorities. We never heard what became of it. Whether it was human or animal, recent or ancient, significant or meaningless. Some questions remain unanswered, no matter how desperately you want closure. That night, safe in our own bedroom miles from the forest, I still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house settling made me tense. I kept seeing her face in my mind, that vacant stare, the dirt-streaked skin. The methodical way she dug into the earth as if compelled by some force beyond reasoning. Joseph suggested we stop camping for a while. I agreed, though something in me resisted the idea of letting one disturbing encounter rob us of something we loved. Still, whenever I close my eyes and imagine a tent around me, I hear the scratching again, nails against soil. Searching, always searching, looking back. It's the most unnerving experience I've had. Worse than storms or wildlife or anything else you typically worry about in the wilderness. Because when it's a person acting that way, you can't predict what's going to happen. You can't understand their motivations or anticipate their next move. The unknown lingers, creeping under your skin, reminding you that, out in the wild, your sense of safety can shatter without warning. And all it takes is one stranger with a strange agenda. Sometimes I wonder who she was. What drove her to dig those holes in the dark? What significance did those buried items hold? Was she placing them or retrieving them? Was she dangerous or damaged or both? I'll never know. But sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I imagine her still out there in those woods, crouched low to the ground, fingers working methodically into the soil, still digging, still searching, and finding things that should perhaps remain buried. And I wonder, with a shudder that refuses to fade even years later, if someday she'll dig up something far worse than a tooth. Or if someday someone will find her, a mystery buried in the forest soil with no explanation for the line of holes she left behind. Growing up as an only child in the rainy, foggy coastal city of Glendale, I relished the freedom that came with being home alone while my parents were away. At 16 years old in the summer of 2018, they trusted me enough to leave me by myself for a long weekend while they went to catch their favorite band on tour. Little did I know, the relaxing solitude I usually enjoyed would be shattered by a series of inexplicable events that began on that fateful Friday afternoon. The rain pounded against the living room window as I sat on the couch, engrossed in a game of Halo Reach on my Xbox. The thick fog seemed to swallow up the typical city sounds, leaving only the steady white noise of the downpour. Feeling a bit frustrated after a lackluster match, I glanced outside and had to do a double take at the strange sight that greeted me. There, on the sidewalk in front of my house, walked an unusually tall woman, moving at an eerily slow pace. As I studied her, more disconcerting details emerged. Despite the chilly, wet weather, she wore only a thin, low-cut dress without any coat or jacket. Her short black hair clung to her pretty face, which was turned slightly downward. Judging by the maple tree she passed, I estimated her height to be around 6'6". Why on earth would someone be walking so slowly in nothing but a flimsy dress through this miserable rain? I wondered. It was certainly odd, but I figured it wasn't any of my business. Shaking my head, I queued up for another game. But I couldn't resist sneaking a few more peeks at the mysterious woman as she continued her snail-like journey past my house. Just as she reached the edge of my window's view, I could have sworn she turned and looked directly at me before disappearing around the corner. A slight shiver ran through me, though I couldn't quite pinpoint why. The rest of the evening passed without incident, the strange woman eventually slipping from my mind as I lost myself in binge-watching a new Netflix series. But at around 10 p.m., movement outside the window once again drew my gaze. The heavy rain persisted, but the dense fog had mostly dissipated, allowing the soft orange glow of the streetlights to penetrate the darkness. And there, illuminated under one of those lamps, was the unmistakable figure of the tall woman in the dress. She was moving even more slowly than before, barely covering a foot every 10 seconds. I paused the show, unable to look away as she gradually inched her way down the sidewalk. As she passed directly beneath the streetlight, I let out an audible gasp. The woman looked like she had been through hell. Her dress was torn in several places, and her pale skin was smeared with grime and mud, as if she had taken a fall on the soggy ground. She seemed to be struggling, her posture suggesting pain and fatigue. Concern overpowered my initial hesitation. This woman was clearly in trouble and needed help. I leaped up from the couch and hurried to the front door, flinging it open and stepping out onto the sheltered porch. But as I raised my hand to call out to her, she vanished. It had only taken a second for my eyes to leave her as I exited the house, but somehow in that brief moment, she had disappeared. Even if she had broken into a sudden sprint, there was no way she could have moved out of my line of sight that quickly. I stood there stunned for a long minute, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. A thorough scan of the surrounding area offered no clues to her whereabouts. Deeply unsettled, I retreated back inside, double-checking that I had locked the door behind me. Sleep did not come easily that night, my mind replaying the bizarre encounter over and over as I tossed and turned. To my surprise, I ended up sleeping fairly late the next morning, finally dragging myself out of bed around 9:30, the relentless rain drumming on the roof and the lingering unease from the previous evening's events made the cozy interior of my home feel like a welcome refuge. After a quick shower, I padded into the kitchen to refill my cat Jasper's food and water bowls, taking a moment to chuckle half-heartedly at his voracious enthusiasm for his breakfast. Still puzzling over whether I had imagined the whole thing with the woman, I settled back onto the couch and lost myself in a few more rounds of Halo. But my focus kept drifting to the rain-splattered window, my eyes flicking back to it between matches. When the clock hit noon, I set down my controller and ventured into the kitchen for a snack and some water, stretching out my stiff muscles. As I returned to the living room, sipping from my glass, my gaze was again drawn to the window out of habit. I nearly choked on the water. There she was, the woman from last night, shuffling down the sidewalk through the pouring rain and thick fog. The daylight, dim as it was, provided a clearer look at her deteriorating state. Her tall frame was hunched over, arms wrapped around herself as if warding off the cold. What remained of her dress hung off her in tatters, plastered to her skin and revealing far too much of the glistening muck-streaked flesh beneath. I stood frozen, glass halfway to my lips, as she moved past at an agonizingly slow pace. Movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. Across the street, a man walked briskly in the opposite direction, apparently undeterred by the foul weather. I waited for him to react to the woman's obvious distress, to stop and offer her aid. But to my shock, he didn't even spare her a glance. It was as if she wasn't even there, completely invisible to him. Just as the man passed out of view, the woman suddenly stopped and clutched at her chest, swaying for a moment before collapsing to her knees on the rain-soaked pavement. Heart pounding, I dropped my glass, barely registering the shatter as I bolted for the door, phone in hand. If she was having a medical emergency, she needed help immediately. I raced down the short path from my porch to the sidewalk, ready to call an ambulance. But when I reached the spot where I was certain I had seen her fall, there was nothing. No crumpled, unconscious figure, no blood or signs of a struggle. She had simply vanished. Unnerved, I jogged a little ways up and down the sidewalk, scanning the surroundings for any trace of her. But the street was deserted, the unrelenting rain the only movement. Crouching down to where I thought she had collapsed, I noticed something bizarre. A small patch of the sidewalk that felt warm to the touch, even hot, despite the chilly water pouring down on it. Jerking my hand back, I muttered in disbelief, "What in the world?" I barely slept a wink Saturday night, my mind churning with questions and unsettling possibilities. By the time weak sunlight began to filter through my rain-streaked window on Sunday morning, I was already downstairs nursing a cup of strong coffee, determined to stay alert in case the mysterious woman made another appearance. But the day passed without incident, no sign of the tall figure in the tattered dress. As evening fell, I tried to convince myself that the stress of being alone for the weekend had caused me to imagine the whole thing. Just an extremely vivid, recurring hallucination brought on by too many hours of video games and junk food. It was a flimsy explanation, but the alternative, that I had actually seen a woman appear and disappear, was too disturbing to consider. Figuring I should probably do something productive before my parents returned the next day, I spent a few hours cleaning the house from top to bottom, the mindless work providing a welcome distraction. By the time I crawled into bed just after midnight, I was exhausted, my eyes heavy and gritty. Sleep was just beginning to overtake me when 3 distinct knocks echoed through the quiet house. causing me to sit bolt upright in bed, my drowsiness evaporating. They were heavy, deliberate, and unmistakably coming from the front door. I held my breath, hoping I had imagined it, but a minute later the 3 knocks sounded again, sending my heart into overdrive. Who could possibly be at the door this late? And in this weather? My parents weren't due back until tomorrow afternoon. Pulse pounding in my ears, I crept downstairs as silently as I could, not wanting to alert whoever was outside to my presence. Reaching the front door, I pressed my eye to the peephole, my clammy hands shaking slightly. But the porch was empty, no sign of a late-night visitor. Perplexed, and more than a little spooked, I unlocked the door and pulled it open just a crack, peering out into the rain-soaked night. At first glance, everything appeared normal, the street quiet and deserted. But as I made to close the door, something caught my eye, a small bright splash of color on the weathered welcome mat. I stooped to pick it up, my breath catching in my throat as I examined it under the porch light. It was a lollipop, a large red one, the kind you might see at a county fair or candy shop. The cellophane wrapper was tied with a thin black ribbon, the material soft and silky between my fingers. There was no note, no explanation for its presence. I took the strange gift inside, locking the door securely behind me. In the harsh light of the kitchen, I turned the lollipop over in my hands, searching for any identifying marks or labels. But there was nothing, just the generic, almost too perfect candy and that unusual ribbon, which seemed to absorb the light around it. Something about it felt off, a niggling sense of wrongness that I couldn't quite put my finger on. After a few minutes of debate, I decided to err on the side of caution and toss the lollipop in the trash, not willing to risk tasting it. But the ribbon I kept, sliding it from the cellophane and tying it around my wrist like a bracelet. It was silly, but I felt an odd sort of connection to it, a compulsion to keep it close. Monday morning dawned chilly and gray, the rain finally tapering off to a light drizzle. I was finishing up the breakfast dishes when I heard the welcome sound of my parents' car pulling into the driveway. Relief washed over me as they came through the door, their presence chasing away the lingering unease from the strange events of the weekend. Over lunch, they regaled me with stories from their trip, raving about the band's electrifying performance. When they asked how things had gone in their absence, I hesitated for a moment before replying with a simple, "Fine." I had never been one to keep secrets from my parents, but something held me back from divulging the unnerving encounters with the woman in the tattered dress. I couldn't shake the feeling that speaking about her would somehow make her more real, more dangerous. As the days turned to weeks, I began to relax, settling back into the familiar rhythm of school and hanging out with friends. I didn't see the woman again, and gradually I was able to convince myself that the whole thing had been a bizarre, stress-induced hallucination. The black ribbon remained tied around my wrist, a subtle reminder of that unsettling weekend, but I managed to push it to the back of my mind. Until a few days ago, when she returned. It was late, close to midnight, and I was on my way home from a study session at my best friend Ava's house. The normally packed subway platform was deserted, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the concrete. Stifling a yawn, I pulled out my phone to check the train schedule, silently willing the minutes to tick by faster. A prickle of awareness made me glance up, and my blood ran cold. There, directly across the tracks on the opposite platform, stood the woman. Her impossibly tall figure was unmistakable, even at this distance, but gone were the tattered dress and dirt-streaked skin. Instead, she wore a sleek black dress that hugged her curves, the hem falling just above her knees. Delicate glasses perched on her nose, framing eyes that seemed to bore into mine. I stood frozen, phone forgotten in my hand, as she raised a graceful arm and waved at me, a small smile playing at the corners of her full lips. The gesture was almost friendly, but there was something predatory about it, a sense of anticipation that made my skin crawl. As I watched in mute horror, her other hand drifted to her left wrist, long fingers toying with a thin band of black that encircled it. My gaze dropped to my own wrist, to the identical ribbon I had impulsively tied there all those weeks ago. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. She knew. She had left the lollipop, had somehow marked me with the ribbon. Before I could react, a train came barreling into the station, screeching to a halt in front of the woman and obscuring her from view. I blinked rapidly, my paralysis broken, and took a stumbling step back from the edge of the platform. When the train pulled away a minute later, she was gone. The opposite platform as deserted as it had been when I first arrived. I barely remember the rest of the journey home, my mind reeling as I tried to process what I had seen. It had to have been her, the same tall, beautiful woman who had haunted my thoughts for weeks. But how was it possible? And what did she want with me? With shaking hands, I unlocked the front door and slipped inside, engaging the deadbolt behind me. The house was quiet and still, my parents having gone to bed hours ago. I crept up the stairs to my room, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake them. Closing the door softly behind me, I sank onto the edge of my bed, my legs suddenly weak. I fumbled with the ribbon on my wrist, intending to yank it off and stuff it out of sight. But as my fingers brushed the silky material, a wave of calm washed over me, my racing heart slowing and my breathing evening out. It was almost as if the ribbon was alive, responding to my touch with a soothing energy that drained the fear and confusion from my body. I lay back on the bed, suddenly bone-tired, and let my eyes drift shut. As I hovered on the edge of sleep, fragments of the woman's face floated through my mind, her dark, knowing eyes, her enigmatic smile. And somehow, inexplicably, I felt a sense of connection, of longing. The next few days passed in a haze, my thoughts consumed by the mysterious woman and the strange hold she seemed to have over me. I went through the motions of my daily routine, attending classes and completing assignments, but my heart wasn't in it. I found myself constantly glancing at the black ribbon on my wrist, running my fingers over its smooth surface like a talisman. My friends noticed the change in my demeanor, the distracted air that hung over me like a cloud. They asked if everything was okay, if I needed to talk, but I brushed off their concern with a forced smile and a vague excuse about stress from school. How could I even begin to explain what I had experienced, the impossible events that had unfolded over the past few months? I knew I should be afraid, that I should tell someone what was happening. But the more I thought about the woman, the more I felt drawn to her like a moth to a flame. There was something magnetic about her, a pull that I couldn't resist even if I wanted to. And deep down, I wasn't sure I did want to resist. As much as she terrified me, there was a part of me that craved the thrill of her presence, the electric charge that coursed through my veins whenever I caught a glimpse of her. I found myself staying up late into the night, pacing my room and replaying every encounter with her in my mind. I analyzed every detail, from the way she moved to the intensity of her gaze, searching for some clue as to who or what she was. But there were no answers, only more questions. And as the days turned into weeks, I began to wonder if I would ever see her again, if the strange connection between us had been nothing more than a figment of my imagination. Until one rainy night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard it. 3 unmistakable knocks, heavy and deliberate, echoing from the front door. My heart leapt into my throat as I sat up, my body moving almost of its own accord. I padded down the stairs in a daze, my bare feet silent on the carpet. As I reached for the doorknob, I caught a glimpse of the black ribbon on my wrist, pulsing softly in the dim light. And somehow I knew what, or rather who, I would find on the other side. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and pulled the door open, ready to face whatever lay ahead. For better or worse, my fate was tied to hers now, and I was done running from it. The summer I turned 8 years old, I discovered a newfound sense of independence. My parents gifted me and my older brother a 4-person tent. allowing us the freedom to camp out either in our small backyard or set it up in the lounge for indoor adventures. That particular summer, my brother had reached the age where hanging out with his kid sister was decidedly uncool. So most nights, I was left to my own devices, setting up the tent by myself in our backyard. Our house was situated in a small rural town on the North Island of New Zealand. The area had only recently been converted from farmland to residential zones about 15 years prior, so patches of dense native bush still bordered many of the properties, including ours. The tent took up most of the space in our modest backyard. I could walk about 3 feet along one side before hitting the fence, while the other side had a 2-meter gap separating it from the house. Despite the close quarters and sheltered location, my parents felt it was safe enough to let me camp out there alone. It was a different time. We knew all our neighbors, crime was practically non-existent, and the back door was often left unlocked. One balmy evening, I made the impulsive decision to sleep outside, since the tent was still pitched from the previous night and stocked with everything I would need. Armed with a torch and some snacks, I zipped myself inside just as the sun began to set. Plopping down on top of the air mattress, I pulled a thin blanket over me, the sleeping bag much too stifling in the warm night air. Lulled by the tranquil sounds of the countryside, I drifted off to sleep. An unsettling noise roused me from my slumber. Heavy, plodding footsteps circled the perimeter of the tent in the pitch darkness. Without a watch or clock, I had no way to tell the exact time. But peering out, I could see all the lights extinguished in the house. It had to be well past 11 p.m., when my parents typically retired for the night. At first, I thought it might be my brother playing a prank on me, as we often did to each other. But as I listened more intently, I soon realized these footfalls were far too weighty and forceful to be his. My next thought was that it must be Dad, though it struck me as extremely out of character. He had never pulled such a stunt before. Mustering my courage, I called out in a volume just loud enough for the figure to hear me, expecting to be greeted by my father's familiar voice. Instead, a primitive, guttural growl emanated from the darkness, a sound that still haunts me to this very day. No human vocal cords could possibly produce such a chilling noise. Trembling, I clutched my teddy bear tightly to my chest as whatever was lurking outside began to scratch and claw at the sides of the tent. The growls morphed into deep, sinister chuckles, reminiscent of a possessed gorilla. This nightmarish cacophony slowly made its way around the tent's perimeter, the creature's nails raking against the nylon walls as it circled me like prey. Though it felt like an eternity to my terrified 8-year-old mind, in reality the ordeal probably only lasted a few minutes before an eerie silence fell over the backyard. Even the normal nightly noises like the hooting owls and croaking frogs suddenly ceased, as if the appearance of this malevolent being had scared them into hiding as well. For a brief, foolish moment I thought perhaps the danger had passed. I inhaled deeply, trying to calm my rattled nerves. But no sooner had I let out that breath than something solid struck the side of the tent. In the morning light I would discover it was a rock, but in that moment I had no clue what it could be. A barrage of projectiles began pelting the thin fabric separating me from the horrors outside. I was now too petrified to even cry, holding that breath as thud after thud impacted the tent walls. Then, as abruptly as it had started, the assault stopped, plunging the yard back into that unnatural stillness. It didn't last long. The creature's terrifying laughter shattered the false sense of security, growing louder and more frenzied as heavy footsteps charged straight towards me. I yanked the blanket over my head and squeezed my teddy bear with all my might, too afraid to even breathe. Suddenly, the footsteps halted right outside my tent door, and the laughter died down to a low snicker. But a new horror was unfolding before my eyes. The zipper began to slowly inch its way down, the door flap bulging inward as something started to force its way inside. My panic-stricken brain finally remembered the flashlight lying by my side. Snatching it up, I scrambled backwards until I was pressed against the rear tent wall. With a trembling hand, I aimed the beam directly at the entrance just as the flap peeled back, pouring light onto the monster's hideous face. Its eyes were like two bottomless pits, drawing me into a void of pure malevolence. The features were almost human, but not quite, as if a child had crudely molded them out of clay and then gouged holes where the eyes should be. I watched in abject terror as a huge, hairy, ape-like arm reached inside the tent, brandishing a wickedly sharp stone. Before I could react, the creature plunged the makeshift weapon into my air mattress, deflating it in an instant. I couldn't hold back any longer. An ear-splitting scream ripped from my throat as it inserted its other arm into the tent and fixed me with a predatory stare, like a ravenous beast eyeing its next meal. My cries must have alerted my dad, because I immediately heard his heavy footsteps pounding down the stairs. The creature froze at the sound, its dark gaze darting towards the back door. Then, quick as a flash, it scampered away into the night, leaving me alone and shell-shocked in the violated remains of my tent. Within moments, my father rushed outside and took in the scene. Jagged rocks littered the ground around the collapsed tent. He found me inside, chalk white and shaking like a leaf, staring vacantly at the deflated air mattress. Without a word, Dad scooped me up in his strong arms and carried me into the house, depositing me in the safety of my parents' bed, where I remained for the rest of the night. Morning arrived, but the terror had not subsided. When I tried to explain what I had witnessed to my dad, he brushed it off, insisting it must have been a possum that got inside because I hadn't zipped the flap closed all the way. He even suggested I had collected and placed the rocks there myself, but simply didn't remember doing so, since he knew I had a penchant for amassing small boulders and stones. That was impossible, though. I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't responsible for the rocks encircling the demolished tent. And no mere possum could ever be mistaken for the nightmarish entity I had come face to face with. For years, I kept this horrifying encounter to myself, convinced no one would ever believe me. That is, until a few weeks ago when I finally opened up to my brother about what had transpired that fateful summer night. To my shock, he confessed that he too had seen the creature lurking in our backyard. It was the reason he had so vehemently refused to join me in the tent or be outside once darkness fell. His description matched the monstrosity that had been permanently seared into my memory. The pitch-black eyes, the uncanny, not quite human face, that massive ape-like body. After listening to countless episodes of this podcast, I now strongly suspect that what I encountered was a Mohawk man, a cryptid native to New Zealand, known for territorial aggression and feeding on unfortunate humans who stumble into its domain. Had my father not heard my desperate screams that night, I very well may have become its latest victim. Since that traumatic experience, I have developed an intense, deep-seated aversion to camping and being alone outdoors overnight in any capacity. I'm still struggling to come to terms with the reality of what I faced, and the fact that there are some things in this world that science and reason simply cannot explain. But I hope by sharing my story, it serves as a chilling reminder that even the most seemingly peaceful corners of the earth harbor dark, ancient secrets, ones that perhaps should be left undisturbed, lest we risk unleashing true horror upon ourselves. The night I met the Mohawk man will forever haunt me, an indelible scar on my childhood memories, a cautionary tale of the fine line between innocent curiosity and primal terror. The events of that fateful summer night 13 years ago have reverberated throughout my life, shaping me in ways that often go unnoticed by others, but are a constant, inescapable presence for myself. The sense of safety and security I once felt in my own backyard, in my own home, was shattered in an instant by an encounter with something my rational mind still struggles to accept as real. And yet, the vivid sensory memories persistently remind me that this was no mere childhood nightmare. The rancid, earthy stench that rolled off the creature in nauseating waves, the rough, leathery texture of its skin, so unlike any animal I had ever encountered before. The malicious, almost sadistic glint in those fathomless dark eyes as it tore into the fragile nylon separating us. These details remain as clear and undeniable to me today as they were in the immediate aftermath of the attack. The problem is, they seem to be unique to my experience. In the intervening years, I've scoured every resource I could get my hands on for any mention of the Mohawk Man. Local library archives, online paranormal forums, discussions with neighbors who grew up in the area, but my search has yielded frustratingly little concrete information. What I did manage to uncover were vague, generations-old stories passed down by the indigenous Maori tribes of hulking, ape-like creatures that roamed the bush, fiercely defending their territory and occasionally preying on human interlopers. These accounts, however, were often dismissed as mere folklore or fanciful cautionary tales meant to deter people from straying too far off the beaten path. For my parents and the other adults, I tentatively queried about that night. The simplest explanation was also the most palatable one. An overly imaginative little girl letting her fear of the dark run away with her, conjuring up some monstrous possum hybrid that existed only in her overactive mind. I learned quickly to stop bringing it up, lest I be on the receiving end of patronizing head pats or worried glances between grown-ups, silently questioning my grasp on reality. As I grew older, I made a conscious effort to push the memory down, to lock it away in some dark recess of my psyche and throw away the key. I reasoned that if I couldn't corroborate my experience through external validation, then perhaps it was better off left buried. Nothing more than a particularly potent nightmare slowly fading with the passage of time. But the Mohawk Man refused to be forgotten so easily. Its presence continued to loom over me, an inky black specter forever lurking on the edges of my periphery. I couldn't shake the bone-deep sense of being watched whenever I ventured outdoors alone. A prickle of icy dread skittering up my spine that had me constantly checking over my shoulder and jumping at every errant snap of a twig. Sleep became an elusive beast, the creature's guttural growls and sinister laughter echoing in my mind as I tossed and turned, half convinced I would open my eyes to find it hovering over my bed, those soulless black pits boring into mine once more. On the rare occasions exhaustion did finally pull me under, I would invariably startle awake in a cold sweat, heart jackhammering against my ribcage, phantom claws ripping at my skin. This pervasive unease began to bleed into other aspects of my life as well. A once outgoing and carefree girl grew increasingly withdrawn and anxious, shying away from social interactions and outdoor activities alike. My family chalked it up to run-of-the-mill teenage angst, but I was grappling with so much more than mere hormonal upheaval, a battle I was forced to wage largely in solitude. Even as I entered adulthood, the specters of that long-ago summer continued to maintain their vice-like grip on my psyche. I found myself unconsciously making life choices based around minimizing my risk of crossing paths with anything unknown, sticking to heavily populated urban centers, pursuing indoor-based hobbies, always ensuring someone else was with me in any wooded areas. 1,000 little compromises and concessions, all in service of keeping the Mohawk Man at bay. But as much as I tried to deny it, some fundamental part of myself was irrevocably altered that fateful night. A dark, primal awareness had been awakened within me, the unshakable knowledge that our world harbored hidden dimensions, unseen layers of reality populated by entities that defied all logical explanation. Once glimpsed, this forbidden truth could never be fully suppressed again. An existential splinter buried deep in my mind. Ironically, it was this same unrelenting unease that finally prompted me to break my long-standing silence on the matter. I stumbled across a paranormal podcast one sleepless night, the host recounting listener-submitted brushes with the unexplained. Something about hearing others bare their souls, exposing their own private horrors to the world, made me feel marginally less alone, less unmoored. Listening to episode after episode, I was struck by the sheer scope and variety of supernatural experiences, each one unique yet threaded through with a common chord of primal terror and awe. Slowly, tentatively, I began to engage with this community of fellow experiencers. First through the relative anonymity of online discussion forums, and later in more intimate personal exchanges. And to my surprise, the more I shared, the lighter I began to feel. The simple act of giving voice to my encounter, of forming the words and releasing them out into the world, seemed to break the creature's thrall over me bit by bit. It was still there, still an indelible part of my history, but no longer did it hold exclusive dominion over my present and future. But the real breakthrough came when I finally decided to broach the subject with my brother. For over a decade, I had assumed I was alone in my experience, the sole bearer of this impossible burden. When he not only corroborated my account, but revealed his own chilling encounters with the beast, I felt a sudden, dizzying rush of validation. I wasn't crazy. This had really happened. Armed with this newfound conviction, I began to more actively research the lore surrounding the Mohor Man and similar cryptids around the globe. What I discovered was a vast, rich tapestry of encounters spanning centuries and cultures, each one adding another brushstroke to the portrait of these enigmatic beings. It became increasingly clear to me that my experience, while profoundly personal and isolating, was but one thread in a much larger web of the unexplained. In a way, this realization was both comforting and deeply unsettling. On one hand, it meant I was part of a scattered but substantial cohort of individuals who had come face to face with the unknown and lived to tell the tale. But it also served as an unsettling reminder of just how little we truly understand about the world around us, and how vulnerable we are to forces beyond our ken. I still struggled daily with the fallout of my encounter. The hypervigilance, the aversion to wilderness settings, the bone-deep knowledge that the veil between worlds is far thinner and more permeable than most people realize. But I'm also slowly learning to alchemize that trauma into something resembling acceptance, even strength. By sharing my story, my truth, I hope to not only unburden myself, but to extend a lifeline of sorts to others who may be grappling with their own impossible memories. Because if there's one thing I've gleaned from this whole ordeal, it's that none of us are ever truly alone in our darkness. And sometimes, simply knowing that can make all the difference. It's a legacy I never asked for, but one I'm learning to shoulder nonetheless. The duty of standing witness to the strange and inexplicable, of keeping vigil on the borderlands between what is known and what lurks just beyond our understanding. The Mohor Man may have forever altered the course of my life, but it will not claim my agency, my voice. I tell my story now as an act of reclamation, of defiance in the face of that which sought to break and silence me, and I tell it as an invitation, a rallying cry to all those who have brushed up against the unknown and carry the scars to prove it. Together, perhaps we can begin to map the uncharted wilderness within and without, shining a light on the things that go bump in the night. For we are the watchers on the threshold, straddling the boundary between worlds. And we will not be cowed by the darkness. We will learn to stare back, unflinching and unafraid. This is our story, our truth. The Mohor Man does not get the final say.